Welcome to another episode of This Is Why I Don't Vote, a podcast. Season 4, Episode 45. Your safe space to discuss sports, politics, social issues, and even religion, where we will take it all very seriously, but not too seriously. Donald Trump becomes the 47th President of the United States of America, and I have a few quick thoughts as to why Donald Trump may have won in such a convincing manner. And the Phoenix Suns are good at basketball. Thank you all for listening. I do appreciate those of you that come back week after week. If you're new to the podcast, please like, subscribe, thumbs up, 5-star, write a review, send to friends and enemies far and wide. This Is Why I Don't Vote podcast is on Patreon. If you like what you hear, please consider supporting. Yes, you will listen to this podcast and there will be no advertisements throughout it. Does that mean that I am terrible at marketing the podcast? Yes, it does. Yes, it does. Does it mean that there's no one out there that has yet decided to pay me to get to you, dear listener? Yes. Yes, it does. Do you want to keep it that way? I know you do. Then give me some fucking money.
Act 1. 3 quick thoughts on Donald Trump winning the 2024 election.
3 quick thoughts about the election of Donald Trump as the 47th President of the United States of America. First, I was right, so to speak. Arizona and Michigan were toss-up states, such that the vote count is taking much longer than a lot of people in those 2 states would like. So although I could pat myself on the back for that, it was not a deciding factor in the election. 2 different states going down to basically a hand count for these last few ballots to determine who's going to win the state. And Trump had already blown through the 270 electoral votes that he needed in order to win the election. And staying on the same point, yes, I was right, but the pollsters, and this is a big issue now, I believe, in electoral politics here in the United States of America, going forward. This is a takeaway that has nothing to do with partisanship. People are no longer willing to divulge to these quote-unquote independent polling agencies, these independent pollsters, what their true opinions are about the state of affairs between politics and social issues and religion. All of us have been inundated with texts and phone calls during this election period. And I mentioned it before on one of the segments I did, I believe it was last week, in anticipation of the election, that whatever no-call list you think you're on, all of the political advertisements and solicitations are accepted from any regulation with regard to a no-call list. People are inundated with these solicitations for money, with these political ads, with robo-phone calls. So imagine, if you're a pollster, how are you going to get through to the different constituencies that you believe that you need in order to have a well-balanced or a well-rounded poll? Fewer and fewer people are willing to take their time in order to give you the answers that you would need in order to have a reliable poll, reliable polling data. I know you got these, dear listener, because I got many of them. Give us your opinion on this issue. Can you please take some time and answer some questions about the election in your state, in your county? It's not that scientific a method how these pollsters reach out to us now. They're using our phones, and instead of just calling us like they did in 1980 and having someone pick up a phone that's actually attached to a wall or that's sitting on a desk, they're just robocalling us, seeing if anybody will actually pick up, or they're sending us texts that have those links to them and hoping that you'll click the link. Fewer and fewer people are doing this, and particularly those that are distrustful of the system, which generally tend to be independents and people, regardless of their political affiliation, who are supporting Donald Trump. Once again, the support for Donald Trump is underrepresented in these polls. The election was not nearly as close as many of these pollsters predicted it would be. The second thing I wanted to note is the people who are supporting Donald Trump. And I'm not the one who came up with this theory. I've heard it a couple of times from a couple of different sources. And I believe that it's true. And I wanted to represent as much here on the podcast, but I believe that this whole notion that somehow racism and sexism account for why Donald Trump got so much white male support discounts that many of the people that ended up voting for Trump in 2024 were very likely Bernie supporters in 2016 who were run out of the Democratic Party as what? As racists and sexist. These were white, male, progressive liberals, independents that supported Bernie Sanders because he was going to, quote unquote, clean up the system. He basically had the same populist rhetoric that Donald Trump did on the right. As we know, Hillary Clinton and her Democratic machine rigged the primary system. They rigged the primary system to steal Bernie Sanders' opportunity to win the Democratic primary. Whatever you want to say about Donald Trump, whatever critical thing that you want to say about his threat to democracy, let's be very clear. The reason why Donald Trump is sitting in the position that he is because the Republican Party honored their own nominating system and allowed Donald Trump to work his way through it, to dominate it, and to become the Republican nominee in 2016. The same thing was happening on the left. The same thing was happening with the Democrats. And Hillary Clinton and her Democratic machine made sure that Bernie Sanders was not going to win the Democratic primary. It is curious, if not hypocritical, that the Democrats are always crying that they're trying to support the integrity of democracy when in fact, in 2 of the last 3 presidential elections, they subverted their own primary system, once in 2016 to thwart Bernie, and again in 2024 in order to prop up Joe Biden, which I believe left a bad taste in a number of people's mouths. But in my mind, no more so than the people who had tried to reform the party. I guess that was what they would say that they were doing in 2016 by supporting someone like Bernie, and seeing the same thing over again. Seeing that basically the Democratic Party is going to subvert its own democratic process whenever it suits them, and they're going to prop up a Joe Biden that everyone knew was senile. And that's not a criticism of Joe Biden. He is an older man. He has diminishing mental faculties, and it was clear that he was as close to senile as one could get while still being propped up in the most powerful position on planet Earth. That leads me to my final point, and that's who was going to vote for Kamala. Who were they betting on that needed to show up to the polls if Kamala wasn't going to be able to win over, let's say, the progressive liberal wing of her own party, independents, white males? Well, she was gambling on 2 different constituencies, namely women, and women were going to show up to vote because in many states in the union, there were ballot initiatives, there were propositions that dealt with abortion. So women showing up to vote on the right for an abortion were going to vote for Kamala. That was the calculus. In addition, she was counting on a large segment of the Hispanic vote. I know CNN did this, and I think both Fox News and MSNBC did as well, but they looked at a number of different counties who were reporting in different key swing states, and they showed what percentage of votes Kamala got in excess of Biden in 2020. So in other words, how many more votes did she get in these areas than Biden received in 2020? The idea being, well, if that same constituency was going to vote for Biden, and you had women who were showing up in higher numbers, women who weren't that politically active, but would become politically active, galvanized, charged, if you will, over the abortion issue, how many more votes did she get? And they went state by state, county by county. Pennsylvania was the most stark, and she didn't have, in Pennsylvania, one county where she got more votes than Joe Biden did. You look at other key swing states, and she would get a county here or a county there. The point being, people didn't show up in droves as the Democrats expected they would, namely women, namely young women, to vote for Kamala Harris, whereas young men who are less likely to show up to vote, even if they say that they will. They did show up to vote for one Donald Trump. So in my mind, I think we're going to get more information, but the breakdown is as such. You had a pollster who couldn't get the right people to respond to their polls. And perhaps one could say, well, that's limited to time or money for that individual pollster. But as the election unfolds, we realize that's not just a pollster. That is the system. That is the polling community. None of them could get the kind of data that they needed because people aren't responding the way that they would maybe 10 or 20, but particularly 40 years ago. So polls are going to be inaccurate, and I don't know that that's a bad thing. I've stated on this podcast numerous times that these pollsters, you don't know who they're working for and you don't know what their biases are. So not having reliable poll data is not an impediment to us as a voting public. Polls are basically social proof. Who do we think is going to win? Who looks like they're winning? And do we really need that? If we're making a informed choice, an educated choice as to who we're going to vote for, who gives a shit? Who's in the lead 3 months or 2 months or a month before the election? White males did come out in droves to vote for Donald Trump. And in my mind, I don't believe that these individuals were motivated by race or gender. They had been alienated by the very party that was asking for their vote, or they had been independents who felt like they didn't really have any alternative because the Democrats didn't have a real primary. And they weren't putting up a politician that had been polished through a primary process, that had independent ideas of the administration that she was involved with, or at least if she did, she couldn't articulate them. And finally, the women that the Democrats anticipated would come to vote didn't show up in the numbers that they expected in order to overcome potentially the alienation that the white male progressive liberal voter felt after 8 years of being kicked to the corner by the Democratic establishment. One final thing I'd like to say, and I don't know that this is going to be systemic. I hope it is, but I think it's a phenomenon that's unique to Trump, and that's split ticket voting. People who are going up and down the ballot now, and they don't give a damn who that candidate is affiliated with, whether or not they're a Republican, a Democrat, or an independent. The diehard Ds are going to vote for the Ds, and the diehard Rs are going to vote for the Rs. That's just the way it is. But there are more and more people that are identifying as independent, and there are more and more people that appear to be split ticket voting. You look at a state like Arizona, where the abortion bill passes, and it does so relatively easily, and yet it's very likely that Donald Trump is going to win the state for president of the United States. Kari Lake, one of his acolytes who is running for the Senate, she looks like she's going to lose to the Democrat, Ruben Gallegos. I am very encouraged by split ticket voting because it changes the narrative as to whether or not you can have a political platform for one party or the other, and that's going to win over voters regardless of the merit of the candidate. More independent voters, people who identify as independent, who are willing to vote across the aisle, or more importantly, not in accord with talking points on the right or the left, that is a natural progression within a two-party system. Or better said, that is the two-party system evolving and progressing. The country didn't come to an end in a 4-year Donald Trump presidency, and the country didn't come to an end in a 4-year Joe Biden presidency. So whether you're celebrating or you're boo-hooing, things are going to be fine.
Act 2. The Phoenix Suns are good at basketball.
As of the recording of this podcast segment, the Phoenix Suns are 7-1 and look very strong coming out of the gate in the opening games of the 2024 NBA season. Credit to the front office, going out and getting 2 true point guards, Tyus Jones and Ty Washington, guys that aren't Chris Paul style point guards. They're not looking to score as well as to distribute. Granted, they can score, but on a team like this, you need a true point guard that can carry the ball over the half-court line, can run the offense, and can put the ball in the hands of 3 very capable scorers, Bradley Beal, Devin Booker, and one professional scorer, Kevin Durant. A move that I loved because he's been a great role player for a number of teams over the years, namely the Milwaukee Bucks when they won the championship, when Grayson Allen and Mike Budenholzer coming over, already familiar with Allen, having him work into the mix with all of these scorers, having him be able to play defense, he can shoot the three. This is the Suns team that everyone expected last season and just wasn't capable of getting it done. They weren't constructed properly, and I don't believe that they were coached properly given who they had on their roster. Whereas now, you've got all the pieces that you need in order to win in the NBA. And a quick comment on bringing in someone like Mike Budenholzer, who, in hindsight, might have gotten a raw deal in Milwaukee. You've got someone like Damian Lillard filling the shoes for Chris Middleton, who left and went to Boston. So you do have a different Milwaukee Bucks team, but you also have a substantially similar Milwaukee Bucks team, and you figure that Damian Lillard would be an upgrade over Chris Middleton, so that team would still be competing not only in the Eastern Conference, but for an NBA championship, and they faded away. That's not to say that they couldn't come back and have a great season this season and be competing for an NBA championship, but you expected more out of the Milwaukee Bucks given all the moves that they made, and they went out of the playoffs last year like a wet fart. The West is absolutely stacked, so I don't want to get too excited by the Phoenix Suns coming out and having a good start, but I feel like if they can stay healthy, and that is a huge asterisk when you have one Bradley Beal on your team and you have one Kevin Durant on your team. If they can stay healthy with this roster and this coaching staff, I believe that they are a threat to win the NBA championship. That is a bold statement, you may say. But if you look at their roster now, and I haven't even talked about it, but they're not small. They can play big. If you want to play big with them, they've got some guys who are a presence in the paint. They've got Bol Bol as a center forward. That's what they list him as. They've got Mason Plumlee, and when you see him on the court, I know they list him as a forward center as well, but that's a big kid. And then you've got Nurkic, who is listed as a true center. No one would say these are two or three of the best centers in the league, but what you need is someone who can stand in the paint and guard some of the best centers in the league, and you've got fouls to give in these three guys, and you can get some offensive production out of Nurkic in particular. Optimism in the Valley of the Sun for one Phoenix Suns. Editor's note, the Phoenix Suns did win last night over a mediocre playing Dallas team. Kind of surprised by their slow start, but there are 82 games, so it's not like they can't turn that ship around and rally. I felt like there were a number of games last season that Phoenix lost in the last 2 to 3 minutes of the game, and yet in this fledgling season, fledgling as it is, we're talking about 10 games now for the Phoenix Suns, they are winning these games in the last 2 or 3 minutes. They were down to Dallas 2 or 3 points in the last 2 or 3 minutes, and there was no quit in them. Not to say that there was quit last year, but they just didn't put it together so they could come through at the end of very close games. Whereas now, I feel like every time that they have the ball in the last 2 to 3 minutes, they feel like they're going to score. And every time they go back on defense, they feel like we're going to get at least 1 or 2 stops such that we can get the lead and keep it. These may be rose-colored glasses that I'm looking through, but the team looks more confident, and they look more cohesive. They look like a more cohesive unit, and that's been a problem with the Phoenix Suns, even under Monty Williams, whether or not there was dissension in the ranks about who's playing where or what style of basketball they're playing. Confident basketball team looks confident. Suns mania on the rise. This is Why Don't Vote, a podcast.